I would like for Tim Hammett to come on up to the stage. Tim is going to be the next part of this, but here's what I want to say about Tim Hammett. I'm not going to read some fancy bio of Tim and all the credentials he's got, and he's the smart one. He's the brains of the organization. He's got all these credentials, and he is my business partner. Good morning. And so here's what I know about Tim. So I called Tim the Bulldog. Amy's probably like, what? The Bulldog. I call Tim the Bulldog. She would. Yeah. Because here's a guy. Here's what I know about Tim. So this guy will get into the weeds. He will have the tough conversations. He is so detailed, and it's just his notes. I mean, it's unbelievable what he does. Okay. And so when we started Visionary Wealth Advisors in 2014, as I was traveling down this road in my own mind, becoming more and more dissatisfied with what I was doing before this, and I talked to obviously my wife, my parents, a cousin of mine up in Minneapolis, an attorney, accountant, and all this stuff is pointing in the right direction. And I had one phone call to make, and I said, I'm going to call Tim Hammett. I'm going to call Tim and say, what keeps you here? Talk me into staying. 4.5 hours later, we got off the telephone. Literally, 4.5 hours later, we got off the telephone. And I remember ending the conversation. I was in Andrea's Steakhouse parking lot, for those of you on the Illinois side that know where that's at. I thought I was going to be at home a long time ago, but we finished the conversation. And I remember saying to him, partner, I can't do this without you, and you can't do this without me. And since then, we've talked every single day and have built a phenomenal relationship. So anybody that has a partner out there, I would say the things that we do well, is over-communicate. Right? Things he does that maybe ticks me off, we communicate. All the things I do that tick him off, right? We communicate. But you know what's funny? There's never fights and there's never arguments because we communicate. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hammett, and he's going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Well, good morning, if everybody can hear me. One thing Brett had mentioned this morning was a support group. And as you all know, those intimate people in your life, your friends, your family, could be your associates. And I definitely have, very fortunately, a very good support group with me here today. I would like to also thank my wife. As many of you might know, I'm probably not the easiest person to live with. That's kind of putting it mildly. So thank you to my wife, Amy, and then my son, Drew, is here today. My other two children couldn't make it, but unbelievably lucky and very, very blessed. We're very fortunate that our first guest speaker outside of Visionary today is Elizabeth Zucker, and she is here. I'll give a wonderful introduction for her. Elizabeth is the managing partner of Interior Investments of St. Louis. Interior Investments is a full-service contract furniture distributor. They provide solutions for Fortune 500 companies and other large local, regional, and national organizations. The firm has 7 locations in the Midwest and represents over 300 furniture manufacturers. Through Elizabeth's leadership, Interior Investments' local office has grown into the second largest furniture and architectural products dealer in St. Louis. Elizabeth is also the incoming chairman of the YPO Board of Directors. YPO is the premier chief executive leadership organization in the world. YPO member-run companies employ more than 22 million people globally and generate $9 trillion in annual revenue. Elizabeth joined in 2007 and served in more than 7 leadership roles in the St. Louis Gateway chapter. Elizabeth was raised here in St. Louis. She's a graduate of Duke. She has 3 beautiful children, Graham, age 14, Henry, 12, and Julia, age 9. If you all could please give us a good round of warm welcome this morning, and welcome Elizabeth. Hello. Hello. Good seeing you. Good morning. Good to sit up here. I think when I look down, if that maybe sounds a little bit better. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Well, good morning.
Hi.
I have a list of questions today, but the one that anybody who knows me knows that I love to hear people's life stories. I always ask all my clients that, my friends that. So I think what we'll start with is a little bit of what it was like being raised here in St. Louis, if you go back to the beginning.
So I always think about this. I was so fortunate. I just had a very normal upbringing. I had two parents who were incredibly involved in my life. I have an older brother and a younger brother, and if I have time to spend other than with my three children, they're the two people I would always choose to spend time with first and foremost. If I could go anywhere, I think about this, I interview for Duke. I always ask the young adults that I'm interviewing, if you could go anywhere in the world with anyone, where would you go and who would you take with you? And if I weren't gonna take my children, I would take my brothers, and maybe my dad as well. Although he tends to draw the conversation sometimes in a different direction. And I think it's incredibly unusual to have a tight connection with your siblings and your parents. And my brothers and my parents are all uniquely different individual people with different strengths and different weaknesses. Yet when we're together, we're all better. And we have fun. I mean, we'll stay up till 3 in the morning playing cards because we're insanely competitive. My older brother and I refuse to not be on a team together, which aggravates everybody else in our family because we always win when we're together. But honestly, my parents just spent time with us, and they cared, and they were there, and just did all the right things. And I think that it's made my life easy because they were just so incredibly involved.
I'm always kind of fascinated in family order, and I'm the youngest of 4. There was a sister and then 3 boys. I'm the youngest boy in our family. What was the family order?
I'm a middle child, and I don't think I present like a middle child, but I'm also the only girl, which makes, I think, me have a unique role in my family. And my older brother's 2 years above me, and we're competitive in every aspect. I think when we were kids, we were competitive more with each other. But now we're a lot alike, honestly. We both have 3 kids. He doesn't live here, but I mean, we're really, really similar. And I think it's been an interesting progression in our lives and who's done what first, and just always being there for each other. And we don't have to talk to each other every day. We could go weeks and not speak to each other, but we could also have an hour-long conversation on a whim. The connection's always there.
Tell me a little bit about your mother and father. What was your father's industry?
So my dad did barter for radio. My dad was a consummate salesperson. It used to annoy me so much when I was a child. I couldn't go anywhere without him knowing at least, a handful of people. He always had to have a conversation with everyone. You couldn't get from A to B in a hurry because he had to always stop and talk. And he was always working a deal. And it was actually kind of embarrassing as a kid that there was always some transaction going on. But it's interesting because I know you'll get to this later, but one of the things I think about myself that was so unintentional that he had a profound impact on is I'm a connector. So there's nothing that I enjoy more than connecting 2 individuals, which is what he did that drove me nuts. I think I do it in a little bit softer way. He's a little on the aggressive side sometimes, but it's funny. Yeah, he was great. And my mom was a homemaker.
Yeah. Brett had mentioned also in his introduction, we talk a lot about values at Visionary. And 3 core values that are important to me is trust, respect, and humility. And there was a consultant I had used years ago who spent a lot of time working with me on that and said, what do I define as a quality relationship? What's most meaningful to that? And I think through a child growing up, there were certain things that impacted that, and a young adult. So I am curious, as maybe we just spend a little time on that now, from a values perspective, were there specific values that you had learned from your mother and your father?
I don't think so much about what they instilled in me. I think about what I want to make sure my kids have. And for me, authenticity is probably what I treasure the most in any relationship. I think that gets back to communication, trust. I just think if you're open and authentic, not a whole lot of bad stuff's going to happen. And life may not be perfect, and it may throw you curveballs, but if you're always open and receptive to feedback, I think the other one is self-awareness. No, that's not like a big one. People usually like trust, respect. I think people that are self-aware are always improving. They're always trying to be a better person and have a bigger impact on the world because they know what their footprint is and they know where their areas for improvement are. And none of us are perfect, and so for me, that's a big one. And then the other one is just, this one's simple, I think, too, and this was very much one my parents instilled in me and that I think is super important with my kids. And they argue all the time about, well, so-and-so has different rules, or you have different expectations for him versus me. Well, I do, because I think we all have different potentials and we all have different areas of strengths. And I just want the best out of each individual. And that applies to the people that I work with and my employees as well. Not everybody has the same potential, but if you're doing your best, that's really all you can ever ask for from somebody. And so if I see somebody's doing their best, it blows me away. It's about that, I guess, getting up, what Brett was talking about. If you fall down and you get back up, perseverance is an amazing trait.
As you hear Elizabeth speak, she loves her family and her kiddos. Can you tell me a little bit about then with those values that you want to instill in your children? What does that look like today? Give me a little flavor of the kids.
They're all very different. I always have this interesting argument, nature versus nurture. So my children are all biological, but they're drastically different in their abilities, in their personalities. I feel as though they've been raised with the same values in the same household, but yet they're uniquely different. And that's always interesting to me because I think so many people have preconceived notions about what their kids are going to be or not be. For me, all I think about with my kids is giving them the ability to create their own happiness. I don't care if they're successful in the sense that they make a lot of money. I just want them to wake up every day and be happy with who they are. And that's a lot, actually, because so many people don't have that ability to make themselves happy or to know what it takes to be happy. And I don't know why I'm such a positive person, but I wake up every day happy. I wake up every day with a goal. I wake up every day, I don't even think about it. It's just so habitual for me. And I think raising children, they don't always wake up happy. They don't always wake up wanting to go to school or wanting to do the right thing. And you can be authoritative, and I think I used to be that way with my children when they were younger. I used to tell them what to do. And now I try to give them choices and let them choose their path. And then there's a consequence if they happen to make a poor choice. But at least they own the choice and they own the consequence. I don't know that telling anybody what to do is a successful strategy. At least I don't find it to be at work or at home. I probably picked up that trait through the organization that you mentioned, YPO, because you might be leading 27,000 CEOs, but you have no authority. They don't work for you. They might respect you, but they don't have to do anything that you suggest or say. Everything you do is through influence. And I guess I think about life, what can I do to influence to get the outcome that I desire? Or what can I do to influence to get them to do the right thing? And I find that much more successful than authority.
One of the questions that we have written down is really just discusses about setbacks in people's lives. And we'll spend a little time because Elizabeth and I had a discussion last week. We spoke for about an hour and a wonderful conversation. There's another side of that discussion too, right? Is to say, well, what setbacks has a person been affected by in life? Tell me a little bit about your answer. And it's a good answer.
I had a hard time coming up with one. I really can't think of anything huge or anything drastic or terrible. Maybe it's because over time, what seems monumental and awful then isn't when you look back. And it's funny, I told Tim, the biggest thing that would be obvious that I would share is the death of my mother when I was pretty young. But interestingly enough, it's probably the one event that has shaped my life in the most positive way possible. So it's hard to say it was a setback. And my mom died when it was about 6 weeks after I graduated from college. She was sick the entire time I was away from school or at school away from home. But she wasn't upset about dying, and she didn't have any regrets. And she felt as though she had equipped us to be successful in life, and she wasn't sad about dying. So it was really hard to be sad for her. And it changed the course of my life because I had no intention, honestly, of spending my adult years in St. Louis. I probably was really focused on being somewhere else with intention. And I have a much younger brother. My dad was really struggling, and I ended up coming back here and getting a job after graduating from college. And I just found something I loved doing, and I realized that St. Louis was a treasure that I hadn't realized existed, and that doing business in St. Louis is an incredible opportunity because there's a half a degree of separation. And when you're starting off in a career, and you may not know everybody, but somebody you know knows everybody in this town. And it's also a very welcoming community. I think it gets a bad reputation sometimes out in the outside world, but I just think that if my mom hadn't passed away, I don't think I would have come back here, candidly. I think I would have done everything in my power not to end up here. And now one of my drivers is thinking about how do I get my kids interested once they graduate from school to looking at St. Louis as a possible place they might want to spend their adult years, which I figure is probably an even tougher, more daunting task than the one I was faced with.
One other item in the introduction for Elizabeth, she is the secretary